Hi, this is Joe Bolen, and welcome to learning about VisualBasic.net. In this video, we're going to look at the mask text box control and how it differs from just an ordinary text box and how we can use it to help control the input going into our program. But before we get started with that, let's take a look at our documentation area so that we can go out later on and look at the code that we're working with in this video. The screen for this demo that I will be working with is at Imager, and also the code for this is at pastebin.com/u/jboh. And this video, as well as other videos, are at YouTube/user/Bolen Presents. So you might want to pause your video at this time and write down these links, and then later go out and look at the code and study it more in detail, or even pull it into your own project to work with it and try it out. Well, let's take a look at the mask text box and understand about it. First of all, why use a mask text box versus just a plain text box or some other kind of control? Well, first of all, we can limit the input to a specific format by using a mask text box over against a generic text box. We can define our own custom mask that we might want to use so that we can shape the data to look just the way we want it, or we can use a quickly defined, predefined set of masks like a phone number, zip codes, date, or time that Microsoft Visual Studio provides for us to set up a mask text box mask. Now, let's take a look at understanding a mask. First of all, it's used to restrict the characters or digits that we're inputting, so that basically we're shaping the data coming in as well as the shaping the data going out, but it does restrict those characters that we're going to be using. It shapes the data input to have additional literal characters. For example, in a phone number, we might have parentheses and a dash for the area code and the last digits of the phone number. In a date, we might have slashes in there, so we can shape that input to have other additional literal characters. Also, we can shape the input to show additional prompt characters. Normally, the prompt character we use is the underscore, and this gives feedback to the user as to how long a entry is for that particular mask text box. So if I have 5 underscore mask prompt characters, I know that I need to have no more than 5 characters or digits going into that mask text box. And then also, I can shape the output to either include or exclude the literals and prompt characters that I'm using. And so that if I want to have the parentheses and the dash and a phone number, I can include that, or I could exclude it if I wanted to strip it out of there. So we can shape the input as well as shape the output, as well as control the characters being inputted. Additionally, I can then code for some key events that are associated with the mask text box and validate for the input, and apply also my business rules that I might have for the data being entered in. Now, there are 3 main mask text box events. The first one is the mask input rejected event, and it's going to fire every time we key in something other than what is acceptable for the masks that we've defined for our mask text box. So let's say I define a text box to accept only digits, then if I try to key in a character instead of a digit, it's going to fire off the mask input rejected event, in which case then I can inform the user that they've entered something that's not valid and give them direction as to what would be a valid input. Another one is the type validation completed event, and this is basically over data types that can be made available with the parse method. So a date, time, or an int32, for example, have the parse method acceptable to them, and if that date we might look at has an invalid month or an invalid year or an invalid day, then this would be the error we can examine and make certain that it is going to be able to be parsed correctly, and we can look at the is valid input to check to see if that data passed the check. And then finally, the validating event fires anytime the masked text box loses focus. As an example, when we tab out of the masked text box. This event also works for other controls, so it's not exclusive to the masked text box property, but it is one of the things we would add where we check the business logic to our program to see if there's anything in terms of range checking or types of input that are entered that we want to filter out and inform the user as to what would be the correct data that would be acceptable to our program. Well, we also then have a number of elements that can define our mask, and we can choose from a whole list here. And I recommend you go out to Microsoft Development Network and look at the masked text box masking elements and read more about them. Some allow for options, some allow for different characteristics based off of some other settings. So please take a look out at Microsoft Development Network for some of the masking elements and their definition. Well, let's take a look at our code. First of all, I've got defined for our demo a simple form in which I placed 4 masked text boxes instead of just normal text boxes. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. Then I also have 4 labels that are defined to see the data that we have entered in our masked text box when we hit the process key. And we can see how that data may or may not include the literals and prompts based off of the radio button settings we have for include literals, prompts, or not. So this area will be an area that we can use to check as well. So let's take a look at what I did and how I got to where I am this part of the code. First of all, from the toolbox itself, we have under our general common controls the masked text box. Now the masked text box can be picked and then dragged to the form, or it can be double clicked and then moved to where we want to put it on the form, and it acts just like putting on a normal text box, but it has some additional properties. And then one other thing that I've added to this program is under the components area, the ErrorProvider. And you can just double click on this because it will go to the component tray of the form. And we'll take a look at that now in this part of the code. Okay, let me hide that. And we'll see that once I drag a masked text box onto it, I have a smart glyph at the top, just like a text box, but the difference is this one will have a different property up here, and this is to set the mask. So I'm going to click on this, and you'll see the set mask option link, and brings up the input mask that we're going to be using. In this case, it's going to be the numeric 5 digits. On that, I'm using just a predefined one. It's going to accept 5 digits, and it's going to have a validating type of int32, which means that whatever we enter in could be parsed by the int32 parse method. Then for the others, I bring up the phone, for example, and we'll see that I've chosen the set mask for this one. I've chosen just the basic phone number with the area code with parentheses in here, and you'll see that the mask here has the literals of the parentheses and the dash, but it also has the masking elements, in this case 9, meaning that I don't have to necessarily enter in the area code, but the zeros mean that I do need to enter in digits only into this area of the mask. Now this does not mean, though, that I have to complete the mask. We'll need to examine that in our code to make certain we've fully filled out the phone number. Now here you see the validating type is none. There is not a parsing method available for a phone number. So even though this is checked, this will not have an ability to have that particular event run against the phone. Now let's go to the short date, where it is a date time data type. And here we see that I've chosen the predefined short date with the slashes. Now we could have used the date time picker and set it to look that way, but I've chosen to use the MaskedTextBox, and it does have the validating type of date time, and we can run a parse against that to make certain that the data entered in is correct in terms of not only being in the format that we've selected, but also in terms of being a valid date and time. So we see here the mask has with it the literal characters of the slashes, and we see that the prompt characters are the underscores, and we're entering in only digits into this area. Our uppercase one is a custom one that I made, and what I'm doing on this mask is all I'm doing is setting the mask, no prompt characters in this case, but I'm using the greater than symbol to shift all the characters to uppercase, and using the question mark, meaning I can enter in any character that I want, not digits but characters, and so this will translate anything I enter into in uppercase. Okay, now while we're looking at this, I'm going to click on this particular text box, MaskedTextBox. Let's take a look at the properties, because there are some extra properties different from just a text box itself. So let me scroll up to the top and we'll come down on that. And one of the things that we might want to set for the MaskedTextBox is beep on air. This gives an audible feedback to the user when the data has been rejected. Now, one thing means that you have to have a speaker on your system, and it has to be turned on for this to work. So beep on air is one you probably do want to set, so it informs the user audibly that they have entered in data that's incorrect. So this is all we can set basically in the MaskedTextBox properties area on that to give some kind of feedback as to invalid data. Now, another area we want to look at is the cut copy mask format, and we can change this. The default is include literals. This will be how we would cut or copy out of that MaskedTextBox, maybe to go to our clipboard and then paste it in somewhere else. And as I come on down to the options here, one of the things we have, of course, is the mask, which is the same thing as clicking on the smart glyph on the MaskedTextBox. It'll bring up the same dialog box that we use. And then as I scroll on down, we'll see the prompt character, in this case is the underscore, that we'll be using in the MaskedTextBox. And then there are others, and the text mask format defaults to include literals. And we're going to use in our code the ability to change this dynamically as we run our code, so we can see how this will differ as we process it with different values for the text mask format. So those are the basic ones to look at: the text mask format, the mask itself, the prompt character, and also the beep on air area as well. So let's take a look now also at our form, because there's one thing about the form that we probably don't think about too much. But the form has one property that will make a difference on how this program behaves. The default for the form that we create is auto-validate, enable, prevent, focus, change. So as we set eCancel on a validation event for one of these different text boxes, what will happen is we'll stuck in that text box until we either clear the text box or we have valid data. That sometimes becomes a difficult thing because maybe you want to exit the program. And we can change that from the default value of staying in that aired up MaskedTextBox to allowing it to change by enable, allow, focus, change. The default, though, is enable, prevent, focus, change, and that's how we'll be using it in our program. And you'll see that in my code as well, so you can see that we have that set to the default. Okay, now let's take a look at the code itself. And what I'm going to do is come over here and change the size so you can see the code better. Once again, a reminder of where the locations are for the image and the code for this presentation. Now let's go to our form events, the load event and the form closing event. Now this particular part of the code does not really need to be in this program, because I could do this in the designer setting. And you saw that the auto validate was set to enable prevent focus change. But this is here just to reinforce the understanding of the setting that defaults to, and it can be changed to override that, but we're going to run it with enable prevent focus change. Now, if that's the case, one of the things we do want to be able to do is close out the form or in the program. And the form closing event we want a code for, and we want to have eCancel equals false. And this allows us then to exit the program even if we do have errors. So this is one thing you do want to code in if you're doing any validation where you have eCancel turned on to true. This will allow you to exit the program or exit the form. So this one area should be coded into your program. Okay, let's take a look at the mainline area. And our main line is processing with the process button being clicked. And the first thing I'm going to do is clear any errors with the error provider. So we clear out the errors. Then I'm going to validate all the children, all the text boxes, masked text boxes, any controls that I have the validating event associated with. And if it passes through cleanly, then I'm going to process the data. In this case, the data to be processed is merely just copying it into the labels that correspond to the masked text box that I'm using. So I'm taking the text property, the first one, which is the numeric 5-digit masked text box, I named it, and putting it into the label version of it to the text property. Once I copied all those over to the labeled version, we'll see what they look like. And then I'm also going to place the cursor back into the first control for further input if the user wants. So this is how we process. Normally we'd be doing something a little bit more robust than just doing this, but by the time I've passed through the validating of the children in here, I have good data and I can process it. Now the clear button, once again, we come through and we're going to clear out all the text boxes of whatever is in there. We're also going to clear out our labels. We're going to clear any errors in the error provider, and we're going to put our cursor back into the first control. So that's our clear button event that we're going to have. Now the last part, let's go back to the design again. Remember we had here the ability with the radio buttons to set the text mask format. And so what I'm going to do is show you in the code how I've taken care of that. So as we come in here in the code for that, basically I'm bringing all those radio button change events here to this code, and I'm then going to quickly set the text max format property for all the different masked text boxes to whatever we set it to in our radio button settings. Normally this is done, of course, though, in the designer part where we set the property for that particular masked text box that we'd be using. So we have those set. I have also down below, and we'll talk about that in a moment, the mask input rejected events will be done through this section. Also, we'll have the type validation completed section below, and the validating section later on. Right now, that code basically is commented out, and I just want you to see what it does with basically just the masked text box with nothing else to it in code being added. So let's run this code and see that this perform. So I have it compiled and running. Now, if I try to enter in just say a character, let's say I enter in H instead of a numeric digit, I should get a beep on error, which I would get if I had the mic set up for that, but it did beep. But it will not accept any data, and I have no idea other than the fact that I've coded in my label that you need to have a numeric 5-digit. So I'm going to go ahead and start keying in correct digits. It accepts it, but if I try a letter, it will not accept it on that. And if I key in too many, it'll stop as well at that point, but it accepts only, in this case, 5 digits into this place. Also, I want you to note, you'll see the prompt character underneath here as I code, so you'll see that prompt character as well. Okay, so this forces me to digits only. It doesn't look for range checking. It doesn't look to see whether I've entered it completely or not, but it allows me only to force it to digits only in this masked text box. Let's go to the phone number. The phone number I can start keying in. Let's say I tried to key in incorrectly a character. Once again, no feedback other than a beep on error, but I can't key in digits in here because this is the way the mask is designed. So I'll use 3330, and I can actually tab out of here with no problem, even though it's not completed phone number, because I have nothing checking to see if I've completed it yet. So all I'm doing is shaping the data going in, and you see here the literals of the parentheses and the dash, as well as the space in here, that are shaping the input for this particular one. Now coming down to the short date, once again I can key in the incorrect month. Say I key in 55 for the month, and I key in the correct date, say 22 for a date, and the correct year, like 2013, and everything's fine, but it is obviously incorrect date of 55 for the month. So that's acceptable in this situation. I have fulfilled the mask. I've entered in only digits, and we see the little characters of the slash in there. So it does take it. Now, if I start to key in anything in the uppercase masked text box, for example, I'll type in Jim, you'll see that it went to uppercase right away, and I can only go so far, so I can't have Jimmy. Well, maybe I can have Jimmy, but maybe I can't have Susan. Or let's say Mary Ann. I can't get the 2 N's because it's only going to allow me to key in what my mask allowed. So Mary Ann cannot be entered in fully on that. So we see how we can control it. So I'll have just Jim in there keyed in, and I can then tab out and accepts it. Now let's see how the setting of the default processes the prompts and the literals. In this case, only the literals should come across, so we should not see the prompt characters here or in the phone area, but we should see the parentheses and the slashes come across. So let's see that as we process the data. And in fact, we see the data coming across. Once again, the data is not totally validated, but it is shaped the way we want to have it. If I include the prompt characters, we'll see the prompt characters come across as well on that, but we've lost the literals because all I'm getting is the prompt characters. And if I do include prompt and literals and processes it, we'll see that I get the prompt characters over here. I get the literals and the prompt characters. Here's the literals of the date, the slashes coming across, and so we see that with the include prompt and literals option. And then I can exclude those and process it, and it'll strip out all the literal characters as well as the prompt characters, and we get the data over here. Now once again, you can see the values that came across are not fully complete. Maybe we had range checking for this. Maybe we were going to require exactly 5 digits to come across. In this case, it didn't get all 5. We didn't get all the phone number filled in, and our date is definitely not correct on that. We did get uppercase as it came across, and we had it limited to 5 characters, but it did nothing other than limit our characters, force us to uppercase. Okay, so that is what happens if we just bring across a masked text box and do not apply any extra coding and work with the events that the MaskedTextBox allows us to code for. So let's now code for some of those extra things to make certain that the data comes in and in fact is correct and meets our business rules and also data rules for our data. Okay, let me close that out. Let's go back to our code. At this point, I'm going to collapse down my mainline logic, and let's go to the mask input rejection section. This is a situation where as we key in data, and I'm going to grab and make this code come alive by setting it and then coming up and uncommenting it. Let's talk about the code. As I work inside the numeric 5-digit MaskedTextBox and I key something incorrectly, I need to give feedback to the user. And one of the things I'm going to look at is if a mask is full and it can't accept any more than the 5 digits, then I want to inform the user with an error message. You cannot enter in any more data into the field. Delete some digits in order to insert more data on that. And what I'm using is the ErrorProvider. Now you'll see when we use the ErrorProvider, the first thing we want to do is set it to string empty for the value of the message. This basically turns off the error for this control. So the ErrorProvider is, we use the ErrorProvider set error method. We pass it the controller we're working with, and we turn off the message by using string empty or 2 double quotes. Then I come down in my logic, and here's where I'm actually using the logic of the MaskedTextBox, and I'm looking at the mask full property. This is a situation where they've entered in too much data for the mask I have. And so I want to give feedback to the user. You need to delete something, or you've entered in too much on that. So I set that message to the ErrorProvider. Now, if I have a situation where the mask full is not my problem, but they've entered in maybe a character instead of a digit, then I want to inform the user that they have a problem with what they've entered in. And normally I'd code you can only add numeric characters 0 through 9 into this field. But I wanted to show you that we also have the reject hint coming in from our augments, the mask reject event augs coming in. We can get that rejection hint, cast it into a string, and also we can get the position and give that feedback to the user of this error. So that's how I'll handle, in this case, the one for the numeric 5-digit MaskedTextBox. The phone I'm going to do similarly. Here in this case, I'm going to look at turning off the message for the phone. Then I'm going to say, well, is the mask full, or are you trying to enter in too much? Same message, basically. And if that's not the case, then I have just a rejection of what was being entered. And for the phone number, it could only accept digits, so I'm telling the user they can only have numeric characters added in. For the short date, once again, if you're trying to enter in too much into the field, I'm going to give a check on the mask full situation being true and tell the user to delete some characters. If they're entering in something other than digits, then I'm going to turn on the provider to say you can only add numeric characters 0 through 9 into this field. Once again, though, in this particular area, I'm not looking to see if the date is a valid date, only that the shape of the data is correct. It must be only digits being entered in. And the last one for the uppercase, once again, I only allowed for 5 characters to be entered in, so mask full might be set on, and you might need to delete some characters if you're trying to get too much in. If your mask full is not the problem, then I'm going to look and make certain there's nothing else. And one of the things I said is you can only enter in characters into this field. No digits allowed for this field. So by the mask that I particularly used for this one, I shaped it to only characters. And so I set this error message on. So let's now see this logic of the mask input rejected event fired off using the error provider set error area of our code. Okay, we've got it running. Let me try to enter in a character instead of a digit, and we see the error provider kicking on, and it says error digit expected at position 1. So now I know that I need to enter in digits, and I can tab out of there and it'll go away. The message will go away. So I'm not looking to see if I have it full at this point, only that I have the right digits. Once again, the phone number only allows digits, so if I try a character, it will give me an error message there. You can only add numeric characters 0 through 9 into this field. Well, let's enter in just the area code. Well, that's valid so far, but I haven't filled it out fully on that. Let me also come up here and show the mask full situation. I'm going to enter in 2 more digits and then try a 3rd digit. And now I'm trying to go too many digits into the spot, and I get the error message, you cannot enter in more into this field. So basically it catches that I tried to put too many digits into this field. Okay, now let's go to the short date. I'm going to enter in once again 5522 2013, which is an invalid for the month. It took only digits on that, so it should pass, and it does. Now if I'd entered in May, as I started to type May, the M caught and said all I can enter in is digits into this field. So, and it was too many. So basically I've exceeded by trying to key in too much. And once again here I could type in Jim, it'll go uppercase, and if I try to enter in too many, let's say I did Mary Ann, I can't get the last 2 because it's too many digits. Max full occurred, and I give the error message on that for deleting. And so I could try Jim, and it would go in and take, and I could process it, and we see it comes across with the literals included as the default, and we see the values that came through by the masked text box. Well, we still got problems though. We got a situation here where we have a phone number that's not full. We have maybe a number here that's violated our business rules. We definitely have an invalid date here with 5/5 for the month. So let's see how we correct that with our code as well. Okay, let's go back in, and now let's take a look at instead of the mask input rejection section, let's take a look at the type validation. We're going to look specifically at the date. I could have done it also for the digit, the 5 digits, but what I'm going to do is activate this code. There we go. And that's a comment there. There we go. And so what we're looking at is coming in, first of all, setting off the message for the error for this particular short date mask. And then I'm going to strip out the literals and prompts. So you'll see the slashes go out in any prompts. And then I'm going to use the trim and see if it's empty. And so basically I'm saying it's not a required field, just exit sub. But if it turns out I do have some data entered in, then I want to look and say, is it valid? In other words, has it passed the date time parsing on that for this particular date type field? And in this case, if it is not valid in a sense, then the data you supplied must be in a valid date in the format of month, day, day, year. Then I'm going to set on eCancel as true and then give an audible beep. Now, once again, remember, the audible beep may or may not work depending on if they have speakers turned on. But the eCancel is going to hold us into that particular short date field until I have it corrected. Another thing I'm going to do is if I pass through with a valid date, I'm going to look and see the date I have is in fact a date in the future, not in the past or the current date. and here's the code that's processing this. Now normally I'd probably code this in the validating event and not here, but I just wanted to show you that we can bring in the return value, cast it into a date time field, and examine it for other rules that we might want to have. But the basic one we want to check is valid input is passed. So we definitely want to have that for any kind of date that we can do, or I should say mass text box that we can do parsing on. So let's see this code run in our code now. So we've added this to our program. Okay, I'm going to go jump down now to the short date. And we know that it will only accept digits at this point. Now we're going to look and see if that validation of the date occurs. So I'm going to enter in 5522 2013, and it looks like it's in the right shape for a month, day, year, even though the 55 is wrong. But as I tab out, we'll see that it's going to reject it because it's not a correct month. And we get the message pops up that you have to supply a valid date in the correct format. So let's correct the format. I'm going to make it 05 now, so it's May 22, 2013. And that should be the correct format, and it is a correct date, but we'll see that other business rule that I have in place that must be in the future kick in. And now we got a new message blinking up telling me that the date in this field must be greater than today's date. Well, I'll go out to the year 2020. That will make it in the future in this case. I hit the tab, and our error provider message goes away. So now we have a valid date in the future, and we did that through the rejection area of the code. Okay, let's take a look at the last area of checking and validating our date, which is the validating events. So I'm going to close down the type validation completed section, and we're going to look at the validating section. And I'm going to activate the code here on that. Let me get that uncommented. Come down here and uncomment this part of the code, and uncomment this part of the code. Let's take a look at what I just did. Okay, as we look at the numeric 5-digit mass text box, and I leave the text box and tab out of it, I'm going to basically come into this area of the code. I'm going to turn off the error message for this control. Then I'm going to also check, I already know that I've got a numeric value because my mask is forcing it to a numeric value. But what I'm going to take a look at this point is the value that I entered match my business rules. In this case, my business rules for this program says it's got to be between 0 and 50,000. If I enter in something other than in that range, that I'm going to turn on the error provider with a message, set eCancel true, forcing me to stay in that mass text box, and issue the audible beep until it's corrected and fixed. So this is a business rule that I've added in here with this part of the code. There might be other ways I could do this, but this is the business logic checking to make certain that I've met the rules of this particular program. And let's take a look at the phone number. In the phone number, I basically am stripping out the literals out of there. In this case, it's the parentheses and the dash, and doing the trim. That gives me just a either digits or an empty string. And if it's an empty string, basically I'm saying it's not a required field, and I'm exiting the subroutine at that point. But if I started to enter in anything, I'm going to take a look and say, have I completed my mask? Have I fully entered in all the things that my mask requires? If not, then I'm going to say phone number is not complete. Once again, I'm going to hit eCancel equals true and issue a beep and force the user to fix that error. And our last area here is I'm going to make a business rule that you can only enter in Joe into this particular one. So either you can have it blank by trimming it out and being string empty, and also it cannot be has to meet the Joe requirement. And here I'm going to say you can only enter in Joe into this field. A little odd business rule, I admit, but I wanted to emphasize that we're basically in the validating event doing our business rules for our data to meet our needs for our program. Once again, we're issuing e-cancel to force the user to stay in that masked text box and the audible beep. So now let's see this one run with the addition of now the validating events. Okay, let's go into our first one, and let's enter in 56123 into our numeric value, and I'm going to tab out, and we're going to have a business validating event telling us it's got to be within 0 and 50,000. So if I go back and correct it and make it 49563 and tab out, that'll go away. So it's in my range. So my business rules have passed at that point. Let's say I start to enter in something into my phone number. I do just the area code 330, but tab out. I haven't completed it. My validation events, oh, look at that, is mask full situation, and say it's not completely entered, and then I'm going to come back and enter in the rest of my phone number, 555-1212, and then tab out, and I'll have completed the mask, and I passed my business rule logic for the phone number. Let's enter in our date. Well, we know already the date has the rules. It has to be in the future. It has to be a valid date. We don't have the validating event as such on this one. So I'm just going to enter in 02 12 and make it into the future of 2020. And that should pass that rule check. Now I'm going to try to enter in Jim in here and tab out. And we said one of our rules says you got to enter in only Joe. Strange rule, but I'm going to change that now to Joe and pass it in. And it'll pass my validation check, and then I can process my data. Now, one of the things just to remember is that if I had something that was invalid, I have an error and I can't leave this area on that until I fix it. But because I have the e-cancel as being handled in the form closing, I can close out the program or at least the form if I have an error. Otherwise, I do have to fix the data and have it just right, and that'll pass, and I can process the data, and we can see how it processes the data across. Normally we use the include literals. That would also be how I might cut and copy the data out of here. If I wanted to copy it, I could copy it out, and it would maintain the rules that I also have set for the cut copy area of the mask as well. So this gives you an idea how to do validation. Remember, we have the rejection event. We have also the data type evaluation that we could do on a date or a integer or other values that have the parsing method to it. And we can also set custom masks. In this case, I set it for uppercase. And I put the business logic in the validating event that only Joe could be processed. Well, the one thing nice about using a masked text box is it makes it very quick for me to add in initially the shaping of data and also how I shape it coming in and going out and what is valid characters in the mask to be entered. And I can do that very quickly without any code at all. But I can then add other code with the different events that I showed you to take care of informing the user that something's wrong in the data, that they need to correct the data before I'm going to allow processing to occur. And that way we guarantee that the data being processed in our program is valid data, meets the business rule requirements for the data coming in, and I have clean data to be processed. We do not want garbage data to come in. As the adage goes, garbage in, garbage out. We want to filter out the garbage, have the user be informed of what needs to be corrected, and then process the data. And the masked text box is a great control to do just that. So get your hands dirty in the code. Go out to pastebin.com/u/JBOH. Take a look at the code, pull it in, try it out, learn how to use the masked text box. And I think you'll discover it is a nice control to bring into your program, making your program a little bit more bulletproof and professional quality in coding. So get your hands dirty in code. Until next time, take care.